I usually have great memory, especially with names and faces, and I can even remember a lot of like really worthless moments from my life that have no real significance. Like the first time I peed on my own clothes, or the time my dad was sitting and watching TV, and I was really into WWE at the time, so I shouted 619 like Rey Mysterio, and I came and I kicked him in the face. Like all of that, I remember. But sometimes I'll forget to do things that I think are pretty important, like moist metering huge things that came out. There's four huge things that came out that I just didn't moist meter, and I don't have a real excuse for it. I know the teacher can discipline me by taking a ruler to my bottom, but it's just one of those things where I watched it or I played it and then just didn't moist meter it because I wasn't thinking about it. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to play a little catch up here for things that I didn't release a moist meter for, and I know the absence of a moist meter on these big titles probably left people feeling cold and alone out in the rain without any guidance. So I know it's a little late, but better than never. Let's go ahead and start with the Dead Space remake. I streamed the whole game. I loved it. It's a fucking amazing remake. Now, it's not a remake in the same sense of something like Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3 or most likely Resident Evil 4 remake. It's not like they rebuilt and reimagined this game in a different way. They took everything that was already outstanding about Dead Space, which is an absolute classic. That game is still iconic. And they just added to it. They didn't make anything worse. They just made everything better. Visuals, they added more lore, more characters. And this time around, Isaac actually talks, which is so much better than the silent protagonist. Because every time, this is just a little pet peeve, every time they do a little silent protagonist shit, it always feels like I'm playing someone who's been lobotomized and everyone has to patronize me. Like they're babying me. Like in the original Dead Space, for example, there'll be a conversation that Isaac's not taking part in because he didn't talk. And they'll be like, Isaac, did you repair the toilet in the women's restroom? And Isaac doesn't say anything, but then they just kind of fill in the blanks for you, like, "Oh, I'm sure you did fix the toilet, Isaac. Such a good boy, such a big boy." Like without you ever contributing to anything, it just always feels like you're more of an active spectator as opposed to a real character in the story. I'm just not a fan of the whole silent protagonist angle. I never really like the excuse of you can project yourself onto the character, because that doesn't really work either if you're not actually partaking in the story or making decisions like that. So I am very happy that they actually added dialogue for him, and I think they've done a good job with it. They, of course, did change the way Isaac looks, but I don't think that is a detriment to the game at all. I think it's completely fine. I think they've done a great job with everything. This is just like the best way of experiencing Dead Space if you haven't played it, or even if you have, this is a great way of getting back into the rodeo and having a great time in the Dead Space world. It was just a ton of fucking fun. Everything to love about Dead Space is still intact in the Dead Space remake, with some absolutely beautiful, tasty frosting on top of that already amazing cake. I think it's just an outstanding remake. Plugging it into the moist meter, I'd easily give this like a 95%. It's probably like one of my favorite remakes. Because not only is it an amazing game, but they just did everything right. Visually, it is a huge upgrade, and I will never understand the complaints from people that probably never even played the original saying that it doesn't look that much better. It is night and day. Go back and look at original Dead Space compared to the remake. It's not even fucking close. It's in a completely different ballpark. It is a beautiful game. It is a big improvement on an already amazing game. So I just think Dead Space Remake is fantastic. Moving on to the next big thing that came out that I didn't moist meter, Puss in Boots 2 Last Wish. I did see this movie. I saw it about a week after it came out, and I loved it. I think the movie is extremely good. The hype that surrounds the film is absolutely accurate. It lives up to the hype. And I'd even say some people undersell how much fun it is to watch. The action in here is very inspired by like the way Into the Spider-Verse does it. It's fucking great. And the main villain that I'm sure all of you have seen now, the wolf with the two little tiny handheld scythes, dual wielding these little scythes. I don't know what the actual fucking weapon's called. I'm sorry, Forged in Fire fans, but it's that blade, like that giant, like hooked blade that looks like almost a question mark that he's holding. Like those weapons are really cool, but that character is super badass. The fights between him and Puss in Boots are really impressive. This isn't like some kind of boring Looney Tunes fight where there's only like a little bit happening. They go hog wild. Like there was times I was like, wow, I feel like I'm watching a top 10 anime shonen moment. It's like they really put a big emphasis on the action. And they do a great job with it. It's flashy, it's fun, and it also has a really good story. It's nothing that's going to be groundbreaking, but it's also not afraid to be dark. It tackles mortality, overcoming the fear of death, Like, how do people deal knowing that they're going to die? Do you hide away, not take any risks, or do you go out there and try and live to the absolute fullest? There's really nothing that I disliked about this movie. I had a great time watching it. I guess the only thing that I was kind of disappointed by is the absence of some Counting Crows. When I'm thinking anything in the Shrek universe, I'm thinking accidentally in love, you know? Like, where's the Counting Crows at, you know? I feel like there could have been a great montage of Puss in Boots fucking beating ass, eating ass, while you got Counting Crows blaring in the background, but, you know, you can't have everything, I suppose. It was a great movie though. I really did enjoy it, and I do think it lives up to the hype. And I'm really excited for the future of it. And I'm glad that it's done so well in the box office, because having more animated films like this is a great thing. Puss in Boots: Last Wish absolutely gets a 90% on the moist meter. I was debating whether it'd be a 95% or not, but I don't know if it's better than something like Redline or Into the Spider-Verse, but it's very close, so it teeters on a 90 to 95%. I'll give it like that little range there. It's a really good movie. And now, speaking of good movies, time to wipe our ass with that whole thing, because we're moving on to a bad movie. It's M. Night Shyamalan's new film, Knock at the Cabin. It's not a bad movie, I'm kind of exaggerating. It's a very cool concept executed in the goofiest way possible, which unfortunately seems very par for the course for modern M. Night Shyamalan films. So, Knock at the Cabin, I'm sure you've seen the previews for. There's this family that goes to a cabin, and then 4 people show up saying that they're going to have to make a choice to sacrifice one of the family members in order to prevent the apocalypse. That's the whole idea of the film, so it tackles, is this family going to sacrifice someone to save the world? Is the world really even about to, fucking explode into this giant doomsday, this Armageddon? Or are these 4 people that are there just insane? Cultists, fanatics, weirdos, goofballs. At the end of the day, they're a random family. Why would their sacrifice for some reason prevent the entire world from just getting fucking blasted? So it's a cool idea, but it is just not a good movie. I'm going to get into spoilers for this one because it's the only way I can really even criticize it, since all of it has to deal with the way that this concept is executed. So just fair warning, I'm going to get into spoilers for this film. But honestly, I'm kind of doing you a favor because it's just not that great in general. So the family that visits this cabin is a couple and their daughter. And the couple is 2 men. So they're a gay couple, and they believe that once they were visited by these 4 strangers, that they were targeted because of homophobia or something like that. And I thought this was going to play into the film because at one point, one of the strangers did lie about their name, and the stranger was actually a homophobe that attacked one of the men at a bar. But that never mattered. He proved that he lied about his identity to the other 3 strangers, and that guy did have a connection directly with the couple in a very negative way. So I thought this was going to play on the idea like, oh, maybe this really is just kind of one big scam and these are just some like actual fucking awful weirdos. But it doesn't. The trailers also put a big focus on the little girl, and I'll tell you right now, she does nothing in this film, and she maybe has 10 total lines. She has no role to play in this movie at all. Really, nobody does. This movie tries to throw things at you like one of the plagues that they're talking about that's going to ruin the earth after they've refused to make the sacrifice a couple times is a sickness. And the sickness is a virus that starts spreading. They turn on the news, they see the virus is spreading. But then one of the men is like, no, this is actually a big lie. This virus has been spreading well before we even got to this cabin. They're trying to pretend like what's happening right here is the result of us not killing each other. And it's like, oh, okay, so maybe it is a big lie. And I thought I was going to play like with the psychological aspect of, is it true or is it not? But it doesn't. They kind of like sprinkle these red herrings in there, but not in a really effective way, because at the very end of the day, nothing that happens in that cabin matters because everything plays out exactly as Dave Bautista says. Dave Bautista is the fucking prophet, and everything he said was 100% accurate. So the twist in this film is that there's no twist. Everything just follows this like on rails fucking Disney ride of exactly what they were saying is 100% the truth and exactly what's happening. So ultimately, everything that's going on in the cabin is kind of fucking worthless until the very end, where one of them does make a sacrifice to prevent the apocalypse because planes are falling out of the sky now. It was just really underwhelming. Oh, and also, Even just thinking about the movie just made me fucking sneeze. But also, another thing is the movie is rated R. They're saying fucking shit and there's blood. Kind of. Every time that something happens where someone dies because the four strangers, in order to release the plague after the decision has been made to not sacrifice one of the family members, they kill one of them. And they do that by bashing their skull in. But even though it's R, they don't actually show that. So they'll show them like getting down on their knees saying a choice was made, humanity's been judged, and right before they hit them with it, they'll pan the camera up so you can't see it, you can only hear it, or they'll just get out of the cabin entirely and you can only hear it. So even though it's R, it doesn't even show you the disturbing stuff. You just hear it, which is highly underwhelming as well, and it takes a lot of this like the intensity out of these moments because then you're no longer even bearing witness to the fucking craziness of it. Like everything about the film is just super underwhelming. Like had they actually came in with more of playing around psychologically of if it's fake or if it's real, I think they could have had something very fun here and pretty interesting because the concept I think is interesting, but it just falls so flat. It really does. Plugging Knock at the Cabin into the moist meter, I'm giving it a 50%. Like, I think Dave Bautista does a great job, as well as all of the other actors, but they can't carry just weak material. So it's just not overall a good movie. Now, the last property that I didn't moist meter is one that people have not stopped pestering me about. This was probably one of the biggest films to release of the last decade, and I didn't moist meter it, which is kind of shameful, but I'm doing it now. It's 80 for Brady. 80 for Brady is a story about four 80-year-old women that go to the Super Bowl because they love Tom Brady. And, man, I gotta tell you, the only reason we saw this is because it was so silly looking. Like, why would this even exist as a film? So we kind of saw it as a joke, Andrew, Aaron, and I. But I gotta be honest, it's not a bad movie at all. It was actually a good movie. And what made it very special is the theater was fucking packed and we were the youngest people there by about 50 years. Every single person in that theater was also probably around 80 years old, and a lot of them had Tom Brady jerseys on. It was absolutely adorable. The film itself is also competently made. Like, yeah, a lot of the jokes are geared towards geriatric people. Like, a lot of the jokes are, the old women screaming or the old women doing some silly dances, but since they're, up there in age, they can't really do the big dance moves, so it's usually them doing some of this. Like, it's actually just adorable, but there are some good jokes in there that aren't, like, bad. For some reason, there's big cameos, like Guy Fieri's in there. It's just not a bad movie at all. It was, like, a really positive film. Right now, we're in an age of movies where they all want to go really dark and grim, where everything's kind of doom and gloom for a little while, taking, like, really somber spins and everything. This movie was 100% just positivity from start to finish, which was really kind of refreshing. And the theater that we were in loved it. They were giggling and clapping at times, like when Tom Brady made a good pass and the women were appreciating it. This movie is also produced by Tom Brady, so this man literally made this movie to just pad his own ego, which is fucking beautiful. He acts in it too, and I tell you, he smolders. Every scene Tom Brady's in, he's just giving like this direct stare down. And since he got his like buccal fat removed, he's got like these, his cheeks are really in, and he's like, Lou, just remember what I did when I played the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl and led one of the most historic comebacks in NFL history. Lou, you guys can do it. Like, that's the extent of Tom Brady's acting, and he does that like 1,000 times. It's so silly, but in a good way. Like, yeah, it's kind of hard to watch where you're like, oof, Jesus, Tom. Like, you're not winning any Oscars here, but god damn it, he's trying, and that's appreciated. It's just a movie where I have no complaints because it'd be silly to complain about it. We knew exactly what we were going to get going into it, but it was even better than we thought in that regard, where it really was just an enjoyable comedy flick. I also appreciated the goofiness of it because it's somewhat inspired by a true story, because some old women did go to the Super Bowl, and they kind of took that idea and went a little hog wild with it. So the women do drugs at a party and shit like that. And then at one point, the old women even win the Super Bowl for the Patriots. This follows the Super Bowl against the Falcons, where they were down by a ton going into the very final stretch, Well, in this movie, in that final stretch, the four old women break into the offensive coordinator's booth and start running plays for them. And then they give an inspirational speech to Tom Brady, who's listening on his helmet, and he's shaking his head and then saying thank you. And then they go out and win the game. It's so uplifting. 80 for Brady, I'm giving an easy 80% to. His shit kind of goes hard. So yeah, anyway, these were like the big things that I played and saw recently that I didn't moist meter when I really should have. So this is just me catching up with all of it, and that's about it. So yeah.